What is going on, guys? My name is Anson and welcome back to a brand new video. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to implement OAuth2 from scratch. We are going to be using Node.js/JavaScript and we are going to be using Discord to authenticate, but realistically, you can take the knowledge from this video and you can use this with literally any provider. So if you want to avoid using third-party libraries like Passport.js, which is what most Node.js developers use for authentication, then you can actually just learn how to implement OAuth2 from scratch. And like I said, the knowledge is transferable. It's interchangeable between other providers. So just because we're only using the Discord provider doesn't mean that you cannot use this for other stuff. Obviously, you'd have to, change up like the authorization tokens and the other API calls. But hopefully this will lead you guys in the right direction. Okay, so I'm assuming that those who are watching this video already know what OAuth2 is. I'm not going to go super in depth on what OAuth2 is, but I will explain like the whole flow as we're actually implementing this out. But basically, for those who don't know what OAuth2 is a way that we can allow users to authenticate using a third-party service. Basically, the way it works under the hood is that the user will go to the provider's page. So let's say if we're authenticating with Discord, we're going to go ahead on our website, right? We're going to have a button that says login with Discord. The user is going to click on that website, our website. It's going to navigate them to the URL that the user is going to, see all of the permissions that the Discord application is going to be able to use. So these include things like, seeing your username, seeing your email address, seeing the guilds that you're in, etc., right? And when you click on that authorize button, what's going to happen is Discord is going to make an API call to your redirect URL, is what it's called. Okay, there's something called a redirect URL. And then when they make that call to the redirect URL, what's going to happen is in that API call, it's going to send a query parameter. It's going to send a code, and that code is going to be used to exchange with the server to get an access token. And that access token can be used to get the necessary details to build out our application. So obviously the details could be things like username, email, anything that's public. They're not going to give you sensitive data. And on the page where you click authorize, they're going to tell you all of the scopes. They're going to tell you all of the permissions that the application will have. So you have to make sure that if you don't want to authorize, then you don't have to. The user will obviously be able to see that. So if they click on authorize, they're agreeing to allowing the application to have access to all these permissions. Okay? So permissions being things like, reading, writing data. So, hopefully that explanation made sense. And if there's any other additional questions, if you guys have any extra questions, just leave a comment down below or join my Discord server. The link is in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are going to be using Node.js and we're going to be using Express. We're not going to be having a front end, okay? But I'm just going to show you how everything is going to work. So here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're basically going to go into our provider. So Discord is our provider. So we want to make sure that for the provider, we always want to create an application. So again, this is going to work with literally any provider that you want to use. If you want to use Google, if you want to use Facebook, the first thing you got to do is create an application. So let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new application. So I'll call this whatever I want. I'll just call this Discord OAuth2. Okay, it doesn't really matter. And keep in mind that this is not a Discord bot. Okay, but you can actually enable the bot if you have a Discord bot. Okay, but the only important thing is that we take care of the OAuth2 stuff. So with every OAuth2 application, there's going to be a couple important things that you will always need. You're going to need the application ID, or also known as the client ID. You're going to need the client secret. So the client secret is actually supposed to be kept secret, right? Hence, the word secret. So obviously you don't want to, list this on the front end or anywhere. This is supposed to be on the server. Okay, the client ID, that's fine. That's just the ID of the application. It's not really anything sensitive. Okay, they can't public users can't really do anything about that. The redirect URL is also something that's not sensitive too. This redirect URL is basically the URL that Discord is going to redirect to and send all of the necessary data like the code, access token, etc., once we authorize. So you need to make sure you have that as well. Now, since we're on localhost, I'm going to be using localhost. So first of all, let's go ahead and make sure we get the application ID. So let me actually go ahead and go into my terminal. And I'll actually create a new directory called Discord OAuth2 implementation. And let me cd into that real quick. And let me just open up my text editor. And let me just write these things down real quick. I'm going to actually save these in an environment variable for now, so that way we can have them for later. So I'll create a file called .env. Okay, just a simple file that's going to store our environment variables. So I'm going to store the application ID. So I'll just call this Discord client ID. Okay, and then we're going to need the secret. So you can always regenerate this if you feel like you've leaked it by accident. But I always like to keep this a secret. Okay, so let's go over here, Discord client. Or actually, let me call this Discord OAuth secret. And you know, let me just call this Discord OAuth. I always want to be descriptive with my variables. Let's go ahead and add a redirect. So obviously we're on localhost right now, so we're going to be using localhost, and you're going to specify the port. So the port is going to be, we'll use port 3001, and you want to also make sure you specify the exact URL that's supposed to redirect to. So on your API server, you want to make sure this route actually exists. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So usually what I like to do is I like to have the /API/auth/redirect route be the route that my OAuth2 providers redirect to. Now, you might have multiple OAuth2 strategies, like you might have Discord, Facebook, Google, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'd recommend maybe also like prefixing this, okay? But I'll just leave it as /API/auth/Discord/redirect. Okay, and you can have many redirects too. Some providers don't allow you to have a ton of redirects, which is kind of annoying, but you can have multiple if you need. So this actually helps you with development. So let's say, for example, once you deploy your application, you can actually change this to your production application. So HTTPS or HTTP if you assume that you have a certificate. And HTTPS TLS encryption. So you could do something like mydomain.com and then the path, right? So it's pretty flexible. Okay. So let me just go ahead and close that, or delete that. But yeah, we'll go ahead and just do that. And what we can do is we can actually generate the OAuth2 URL generator. Okay. So what this does is it pretty much allows us to generate a URL that the user can actually visit. Any user can visit, and this is not really a sensitive URL. Anyone can access it. And you can see over here, these are the scopes that we briefly mentioned in the introduction. The scopes are pretty much permissions that the application can do. So for example, if you want the user's username, their ID, their avatar, basic data, you would just enable identify. And you can see down here, it will tell you the URL, okay? And then likewise, if you wanted the user's email, okay, you would select the email. If you wanted their guilds, the guilds that they're in, you would select that. And like I said, depending on the application that you're building, and depending on the a third-party provider that you want to use, right? Like for example, Google or GitHub would have different scopes that allow you to reference different things. So you obviously need to read the scopes and see what it is that you want to select. Okay, there's a ton over here, but for now, we'll just go ahead and do identify. Okay. So this is the URL, okay, and let me actually just copy this URL real quick, and I want to actually talk about this URL. We're not going to do anything with this URL, so we'll just leave it as a comment, okay, and then once we have this URL, so this URL is basically the actual, URL that users are going to visit, and when they visit the URL, they're going to see the authorization component, and it shows all the permissions, the scopes, and etc., etc. Now, right now, it's giving us an invalid OAuth2 redirect URI, and I think the reason why that's happening is because we didn't save anything. Let's go ahead and refresh, and you can see now it'll tell you Discord OAuth2. That's the name of our application. Let me actually zoom in. I apologize. So it'll tell you the name of our application wants to access your account, and then it tells you sign in as blah, blah, blah. Okay, and this is only going to work if you're signed in. If you're not signed in, then it's not going to work. And it tells you this will allow the developer of Discord OAuth2 to access your username, avatar, and banner. And then, it'll tell you other stuff that, is over here. And if we were to add any additional scopes, let's say if I wanted to add the guild scope, okay, we can go ahead and copy this. And then we can pretty much paste that URL again, and visit it. And now it tells us know what servers you're in. If we wanted to do the email as well, every single time you select the scope, it'll update the URL. So it actually is pretty handy. So you actually don't even need to encode the URL. Like, you don't even have to build the URL out yourself. You can just actually copy this, and it's really easy. Okay, so you can see now it tells us access username, email, and servers. Okay, so I want to pay attention on this URL real quick, just so that you guys can understand. So pretty much we have the base URL. So this is the discord.com/API/OAuth2/authorize, and then we have the query string. Okay. And this query string has a couple of query parameters. We have the client ID, so that's the same as our actual client ID. Notice how there's no client secret. Like I said, that's supposed to be taken care of on the back end. Okay. We have the redirect URL, so that's this localhost /API/OAuth, but this is actually a URL encoded. Okay. So like I said, you don't have to do that yourself because Discord generates that for you. You can if you want to. And then last but not least, we also have the we have the response type, okay, and that's code, and then we have scopes. Okay, so we have scopes equals identify, and you'll actually see if I don't know if you guys can see this in the browser, but let me actually just copy this link and paste it here. You can see that each scope is encoded. Okay, so you can see that we have identify, guild, email, etc., etc. Okay, but you don't have to worry about that though. Like I said, that's all taken care of on the back end. On Discord side, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so yeah, let's just go ahead and just copy this, and let's just paste this back in. So let's do that, and there we go. So when we click on authorize, what exactly is supposed to happen? Well, what's supposed to happen is it's supposed to redirect to our redirect URL. That's the whole point of this redirect URL. Okay, on the first redirect, it's going to give us a code. Or actually, let me actually rephrase that. When it redirects, it's going to give us a code, and then we're going to use that code to actually, we're going to use that code to exchange it with an access token. The access token is going to allow us to get the user's, username, avatar, and banner, and any other thing that's provided in the scope. Now, one thing to mention is that access tokens are short-lived. Well, not short-lived, but they're temporary. I think they expire. I'm not sure what's the duration. You can look that up in the documentation, but for example, the access token can expire, and when it does, you can use what's called the refresh token to refresh the access token, so you can get a new access token, and you can use that to continue to make API calls on behalf of the user. So I figured I'd mention that because that's also something important to note down as well. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's set up our backend API. So I'm going to actually go ahead and initialize my repository, and all the code will be in the description. And I'm also going to use Typescript for this tutorial. But like I said, it shouldn't be too difficult if you already know JavaScript already. It won't be a huge deal. Okay, so let's go ahead and we already initialized the package.json. Okay, we initialized this repository. We'll go ahead and install Express.js. We're also going to install an HTTP client library, so I think we'll install Node Fetch for that. Or we can also use Axios. I think I'll use Axios instead, actually, because I use Axios on the front end a lot, and I really like it. And if you're not using Yarn, you can also use npm. Just do npm install or npm I in the package name. I just use Yarn because I personally like it, and it's a lot faster from what I've seen. Now, since we're using TypeScript, let's make sure we install TypeScript. Let's make sure we install the types. So we're going to go ahead and do @types, and we're going to do Axios /types express, and I think we'll do Node as well. Actually, we don't even need that because we're not really working with any of the default Node APIs. But I think Axios does require the types file though. Okay, so that should be good. And let me go ahead and just set up the scripts real quick. So what I'll do is I'll just set up a start script. The start script will just be a node/dist index.js. That's basically going to run the compiled version of our TypeScript app. So it's going to run actual JS files. Now we are going to be using Nodemon because Nodemon actually restarts the server, so it'll speed up development. Nodemon is going to be used in dev mode, so we're going to specify the start:dev script, and this is going to run the file inside index. It's going to run the index.ts file. Okay, that's inside source. I'm also going to go ahead and make sure I set up a build script. So this will literally just build our file. Okay. And what I'm going to do is right now, if you don't have Typescript installed globally, you can just do yarn tsc, and that'll actually run the local version of Typescript. And I prefer doing that because I actually have a different version of Typescript installed globally. And you can see that we have the tsc command over here. It's stored in this .bin folder over here, node modules. Okay. So I'm going to go and do yarn tsc init, and this should initialize a Typescript file with the local version, I think. But I usually do that just to be safe. Okay. But yeah, so this is going to initialize the tsconfig file for us. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just uncomment out this outdir. So this is going to be the destination of where the compiled files will go to. Okay. So it's basically going to take everything inside our source code. It's going to compile it into this dist folder. Okay, that's why we wrote for the start script /dist/index.js. Okay. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and close that out. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called source, and we're going to create an index.ts file. And let's go ahead and do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to import express from express. And since we're also using environment variables, let me actually go ahead and install .env as well, because we are going to need to import that and call the config function. So that way our environment variables will be loaded. So to show you that, what we can do is we can reference process.env and the name of our environment variable. Now keep in mind that if you have an actual system variable, like on your system with the same name, it's not going to override that environment variable. So for example, if I'm on Windows, and if I were to actually have an environment variable on my path that actually says Discord OAuth client ID, it's going to use that value of the system instead of this local one. So I figured I'd mention that just in case some of you guys might be confused. So let's go ahead and just log this real quick. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just run start dev. So yarn start dev. And if you're using npm, you would just do npm run start dev. Okay. So you can see that our environment variables are working. So that's good to know. So let's go ahead and just set up the application. So I'm not going to, go through any robust file system or robust, folder structure. We're just going to do a simple one. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an app.get, and we're going to have to do the same URL that's going to match this redirect. So, or not this redirect, sorry. The redirect that we specified in the developer portal right over here. So it's going to be /API/auth/discord/redirect. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and pass in the callback function. So that's going to take in the request and response parameters. And I'm going to just type annotate this. You don't have to do this. Right now, everything that I'm doing is it can be done the same way in JavaScript. But TypeScript thing, I'm going to import the request and response just so that I can type annotate these variables, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys something. So let me go ahead and do rec.query. And let me show you guys what happens. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to send a 200. And let's see what happens. Okay. Now we're on port 3000. So let me actually set up a port. So let's do port 3001. I'm sorry, port 3001, not 3000. And let me just create a variable, and we'll reference process.env.port. And if there's no port defined, we'll just set a random port. Okay, but it should run on port 3001. So let's call app.listen. So we'll pass in the port, and we'll pass a callback function. And what we'll do is we'll just simply log the output. So running on port. Okay, and let's go ahead and run our application, and let's see what happens. So it says running on port 3001, so that's good. So let's go over here, or yeah, let me just make sure. Okay, and let's just go back here again, and let's go ahead and provide that. Whoops, let me see. Okay, cool. All right, and yeah, I'm on this is my Discord account right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click authorize. So when I click on authorize, what should happen is it should send a redirect to our endpoint, and we're going to look at the logs. So let's click on authorize, and you're going to see that it says okay. And look what happens. You can see that there's a query parameter. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll try to zoom in when I edit this video, but you can see that there's a query parameter. And if I go into the logs, you'll actually see that that query parameter has that code like I mentioned earlier, okay? And what we do with this code is we use it to exchange it with the Discord API to get the access token as well as the refresh token. All right, so the next question that's probably running through your head is how exactly do we get the access token and the refresh token? Because with this query parameter, with this code, we can't really do anything, right? And this code is also, I think the code actually can only be used once, and I think it expires. I'm not too sure, but once you exchange the code, you cannot use it anymore. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how do we actually exchange this code? Okay, well, what we got to do is we just basically have to call the Discord API. Okay, you can see in the documentation here it says authorization code grant. And it says the authorization code grant is what most developers will recognize as standard OAuth2 and involves retrieving an access code and exchanging it for a user's access token. Okay, well, actually, you know, I kept saying access code, but I actually mean access token. The access token is what we actually need to retrieve. The access code, I guess, is this query parameter here. So I apologize for mixing it up. But yeah, we basically need to exchange this code with the actual access and refresh tokens. Okay, so you can see that the documentation gives us an example over here, and all we got to do is we just need to exchange it. So here's an example that we're going to implement. So we're going to need to make an API call. That's how we install Axios, and you're going to see that we're going to need to send. We're going to need to make a post request, and we're going to provide the client ID, the client secret, the grant type, the code, as well as the redirect URI. Okay. And then for the headers, we're going to pass in the content type of application slash a form URL encoded. And I think that should be it. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. It shouldn't be too complicated. So what's going to happen is when we get this code, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make the API call. Okay. Now, what happens once we make the API call? It's going to give us back the response, and if there's an error, we'll send a message. So let's go ahead and import Axios from Axios, and let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to go ahead and get the code from rec.query. So if there's no code, oh, actually, let me leave that alone for now. Because what I want to do is I want to actually make the API call first. So let's do const response equals await. And let me go ahead and add async in front of this callback function. And we're going to go ahead and call axios.post. Axios.post, and we're going to need the URL. So the URL is just going to be, let's see. So it's going to be the base URL. So this HTTPS, let me zoom in. This HTTPS discord.com/API/v8, and then we're going to need to concatenate that with the /OAuth2/token. So the documentation also tells you what each endpoint does. So you can also revoke tokens too. Okay. So let's say, for example, if the user chooses to deauthorize themselves, right? You can actually call this endpoint to revoke any access. Okay. So let's go ahead and just, let's take this URL. Let me just go back here. Okay. So yeah, let's do that real quick. So we're just going to go ahead and hard code this for now. because we're just using a simple example. So discord.com/API/v8, and then OAuth2/token. So that's going to be the URL. And then in the data, we're going to have to pass in. Now, I think with the data, we're going to have to stringify it. So, for example, I'll actually pass this in the way it is, just to show you guys what happens. Like, for example, if I were to send it like this, I'll show you guys what happens. So let's go ahead and get the client ID. So, you know, I'll just hard code everything for now. Oh, it seems like it doesn't like that. Oh, actually, I can just do that instead. Client secret. So I'll hard code everything for now, and then we'll just tidy everything up later. So grant type will be let's see, authorization code. The code, so we need to pass that code in, and then the redirect URI. That's just going to be our HTTP/localhost. For now, it's localhost, obviously. If you're deploying this, obviously change this redirect URL. So it's going to be /API/auth/discord. Okay. And keep in mind that we're going to actually reuse this same redirect URL. Now, if you want to use a different URL, you'd have to make sure you add that to the application. But I think Passport actually uses the same redirect URL. That's how, I think that's how Passport works underneath the hood, is it uses the same redirect URL. The only difference is that when it redirects to that URL again, because what's going to happen is when we exchange the access code for the access token and refresh tokens, it's actually going to just redirect to the same URL, and it checks to see if there's a code in the query parameter. Because when it redirects again, like once we actually exchange the code, it's not going to have that query parameter, and you'll see it when it's actually being done. Okay, so that's why I actually initially wanted to check to see if there was no code. Okay, but for now, what I'll do is I'll just check to see if code will make this call, and then we'll just send a 200 response every single time. And we'll also try wrap this in a try catch too, in case there's any errors and stuff. So if there's an error, we'll just send a res.send status. Let's say, I don't know, 400. Okay, so and you can see that in the headers it expects application form URL encoded. Okay, so let's see, headers. Let's specify the content type. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure if you try to actually send JSON to this endpoint, it won't actually work. But I'll verify that right now, just so that people who might get confused will get a better understanding on why they might be getting an issue. Okay, so let's try this out, and let's see what happens. So let's go ahead and do the authentication thing again. So let's go back to over here. So let's go, actually, wait, let's go back. Wait. Okay, let's go back here. Let's refresh. Let's go ahead and let's make sure our server's running. Good. So let's authorize. So it says bad request. So you can see that right now, it seems like we actually got an error because of the API call. Okay, you can see that, if we can even see the response from the, you can see that this is the response from Discord. It says 400 bad request. Okay, you can see that that's from Discord, and the reason why is because we are sending it as JSON, and you can't do that. You have to make sure you actually URL encode that, or you need to make sure you send it as a form URL encode. But it's a simple fix. All we gotta do is just simply do this. I think we can just do JSON.stringify, and that should work. But yeah, let's go back over here, and we can scroll down. Yeah, let's try it again. So let's authorize. It says bad request again. So it's saying cannot set headers. So I think, let's see. So it's still failing, though. Let's see. All right, so after digging around some documentation and testing some stuff out, so the problem that we were getting was that we needed to actually properly encode the form data, okay, because the content type is form URL encoded. And so sending it like this is obviously going to fail. And I actually did run into this issue before, but it's been a while since I've done this myself, so that's why I had to just like search up some stuff, okay? But according to the Axios HTTP documentation, let's see, it seems like what you can do is you can actually import the URL module, and you can create a URL search params, and you can just pass it in, and you can pass it in with the toString method called on it. So we're gonna go and do that. So we can just do import URL from URL, and this is part of Node.js. You don't have to download anything. It's part of it by default. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create the params. So let's just call this form data equals new URL, and we're gonna basically create a new instance of the URL search params. Okay. And we're basically gonna take all of this data that we just put in there. We're gonna put that in here. Now it's gonna give us an error. Especially if you're doing a TypeScript, it's gonna give you an error. And the reason why it's complaining about this code, it's saying that, let's see, it's saying that the types are not compatible. It's basically saying that type string or parsed queues or string array or parsed queues is not assignable to type string or read only or undefined. So what we can do is we can just call .toString onto the code, and that should fix it. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this, and we're gonna just pass in form data .toString, and that should fix the issue. So you still will need the headers. I think I can double check real quick. Response.data, and let's go ahead and try again. So let's refresh. Let's go authorize. So let me just get rid of the res.send2 because if it throws an error and it sends the status of 400, it's gonna try to send another status, which obviously is not correct. So what we'll do is, if there's a code, we're gonna make the API call, okay? And let's just go ahead and just send a, we're gonna send response.data. And I'm gonna show you guys what's actually gonna be returned. So right now it returns an okay, but let me show you what is actually going to be displayed. So let's go back, let's refresh, let's authorize. And you're gonna see that we have an access token. We have expires in. According to the documentation, the expires in, I think this is in seconds, I think. Expires in, let's see. Yeah, in seconds. So you can see in the documentation, it says that right over here. So 604,800 seconds is when this token will expire. Okay, so just do the conversion, and then that's how long you'll know when the user will be, well, when this access token will not work. All right, so right now, what exactly is it that we want to do with the access token, the refresh token? So we want to use the access token to retrieve protected resources. So for example, if we want to get the user's details, we're going to go ahead and call this endpoint /users@me. And like I said, all the endpoints are going to be listed in documentation, and I'll provide a link to that. Okay. So if I were to click on this, it will tell you literally what it does. It gives you the user object with the requester's account. Now, if you have the email scope, it will give you that. If you don't have the email scope, then it won't give you the email. Okay. So let's see. Let's go ahead and take this access code or access token, sorry. And let me use Postman just to test it out. So we're going to go ahead and call the endpoint. So let me zoom in a little bit. So it's going to be HTTPS and then discord.com/API/the version, so version 8/users@me. Okay, very, very straightforward. You're going to go into the headers and you're going to specify the authorization key. And for the value, you want to make sure you have the access token. And it actually tells you the token type. So we're going to specify the token type is a bearer token, and we're going to paste in the token. Now, if you actually have a Discord bot and you want to have the Discord bot perform actions, you would actually use a bot token instead. I've actually done that in my Discord dashboard series, but right now we're going to stick with the bearer token. Okay, because you can actually use the endpoint to make requests to actually other resources. Like for example, you can use that to get all of the guilds the bot is in, but you would use the bot token and specify bot instead of bear. I figured I'd mention that in case people had that question. Okay, so I think that's all there is, and let's go ahead and click on send. And you're gonna see now it gives me my ID, it gives me my username, my avatar. I don't have an avatar. If I did, it would give us the link, I think. Or I think it would give us the hash instead, not the link, the hash. And you would use the base URL, the base CDN for Discord to actually get the link to the URL, to the link to the image. It gives us the discriminator, public flags. I forgot what this was. I think that has to do with I think that might have to do with the like the badges, I think. I'm not sure. There's a banner, so we don't have a banner. Banner color, accent color, local or locale, and MFA enabled. So let me go ahead and do one more thing. So let's go ahead and change the scopes. So let's go ahead and attach the guild scope. Now, obviously, if you had the email scope, it would show you the email. Okay. So let me go ahead and go here. And also, one more thing. If I actually refresh, and you can see the code query parent is still there. So what happens is if you actually try to use that code, it's actually not going to work because that code has already been used already. So the code can only literally be used once. Okay. So I figured I'd mention that. So let's go ahead and identify ourselves. Let's authorize ourselves. And let's allow the application to know what servers we're in and allow them to access our username and avatar and banner. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on authorize. So let's go ahead and do that. And you're going to see that it gives us a different access token, refresh token. Now, I think it's going to give us the same access and refresh token if we have the same scopes every single time. So if I actually go back and if I try to reauthorize, you'll see that I think that's the same one. Let me see. Let me actually just copy and paste this real quick, just so I can double check. So these are the same. I think they're the same. Yeah, so it's gonna give you. It seems like it's gonna give you the same access and refresh tokens if you have the same scopes every single time you re-authenticate. But I think once like the access token expires, it'll give you a new one. And I think once you revoke it, it'll also give you a new one too. Because actually, what you can do is in Discord, you can actually go into your user settings and you can revoke. You can go into user settings and you can revoke the access. And then when you try to do it again, when you try to reference the resource, you won't be able to actually retrieve it. Retrieve the resources. So for example, let me go ahead over here and let me give the new bearer token, the new access token. Let's click on send and you'll see that it should give us the guilds, but for some reason, oh wait, I'm sorry. We actually have to call a different endpoint with that. We have to call the @me/guilds. So let's do that. And you're going to see now it's going to give me all of the guilds that I'm in. So you're going to see that it gives me the one guild that I'm in. So DevCord has the ID of the guild. It has the icon. It tells me if I am the owner. It tells me all my permissions, and it gives me all of the features. It tells me all the features that I have on this guild. Okay. Now there's obviously other stuff too. But those require different scopes. Now, if I go into my user settings, okay, and you can see that I have my user settings over here. And if I were to go into authorized apps, and if I were to just deauthorize this, okay, and if I were to go ahead and click on get, you're going to see this as unauthorized. So you can do this if you feel like an application may have been, compromised or whatever. So that's obviously a way how you can deauthorize. But let's say, for example, if you're the developer and you fear that maybe your database, like wherever you save your, bearer tokens, right? Because you're going to need to save it somewhere in order to use it to make, subsequent calls for your application. And let's say, for example, you might fear that it may have gone compromised. So what you can do is you can actually use the endpoint that we talked about earlier to actually revoke access to that token. So this is the URL over here, okay? And right now, I think, let me actually see if I can find the, so this is the RFC, but let me see if I can find the actual, I remember there weren't much documentation on this. But in accordance to the reference, the token and token revocations will only accept a constant of this. So yeah, the problem that we had earlier, it's mentioned over here that it only accepts URL encoded and it will not accept JSON. So in order to actually revoke the URL, we can actually follow the RFC and it will tell you how this should be properly done. So essentially, what we want to do is we want to specify, let's see, the token. So that's required. So based on this, we can actually just go ahead and call this URL. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, and keep in mind that everything that I'm doing in Postman can be done via via Axios, and I'll actually do that real quick. So let me go ahead and do this. So user response equals await axios.get, and since we're not making a post request, we're just making a get. We actually don't even need to do any URL encoding. The endpoint was users, so that's the endpoint over there. And since we're not making a post request, we're not sending any payloads to the endpoint, we don't need to URL encode anything. We do need to specify headers, so let's do that. And the headers, we need to provide the access token. So it's very simple: authorization, and then bearer, and then we'll just use string interpolation. Okay, and then this will return data. I'm going to just go ahead and rename that to user response. Okay, and then we'll just send the user response. And let's go ahead and go back to our authorization. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to authorize, and we should see the actual user data. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to revoke the token. So if I go into my console log, you'll see that I have the access and refresh token logged. So I'm going to show you how to revoke the access token. So let's say, for example, the user does not want to allow your application to do things like get the username or get the avatar, like the updated avatar if the person updated, right? Because every single time they have the access token, they can fetch new data as much as they want until that access token expires. Okay, so if you don't want the application to have the access, you just have to provide a feature for the user to revoke access. Okay, so it kind of works similar to if you were to go into your user settings in Discord and revoke the application's access. I'm going to show you guys how to do it with code. So we're going to go ahead and take this access token, and we're going to need it. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and actually get the URL that you guys are going to need to make the API call to. So we're going to go to the developer portal, and you're basically going to need to call this endpoint, this https discord.com/api/oauth2/token/revoke. It's actually the same URL as this one with the /revoke. You do have to make sure you provide the version. If you try to call this one, I don't think it'll work. So we do need the version. So let me go ahead and paste that, and let's go ahead and provide the revoke URL or the route. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the body tab, and we're going to go to xww forward URL encoded, and we're going to provide the following fields. So we're going to need the client's ID. So that's the client ID that's the client ID of our application. Okay. So let me just get that and paste that in there. We're going to need the client secret. So that's the secret over here. And we're going to need the access token. So for the key for this, you're just going to call it token, but you're going to paste in the actual access token, not the refresh token, the access token. Okay, so you can log it in your console and, copy and paste into Postman if you're following all of Postman, that is. So if I go ahead, before I do that, let me actually try to show you guys this real quick before I do that. So let me go ahead and try to call this endpoint. So this /users at me endpoint, just to show you how this is going to work. So we have HTTPS. Do I have this ready? Yes, so that's this one over here. And we're going to go ahead and take the access token. We're going to pass that in to the header. So authorization, bearer, and the access token. And then we can get the data. Okay, now watch what happens if I revoke the access. You're going to see it's going to give us a 200, okay. And if I try to access the resource, it's not going to let me. It's going to say 401 unauthorized. And in order to actually access the resource, we need to reauthorize. So if I authorize right now, you're going to see that in the console, it's going to give us a new pair of access and refresh tokens. And if I use that to make my calls, you're going to see I'm going to get that. If I want to revoke that token, I can. And there you go. Now, instead of using Postman, let me actually go ahead and do this in the application. So let me just delete these old access codes. So what I'm going to do is we're not going to use a database. Maybe for a future video I will. But for this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and store the tokens in a variable or maybe like an array. Well, we're only going to have one token. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll cheat a little bit. I will go ahead and store this in a variable up here. Obviously, I would not recommend doing this. Okay, but just for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to show you guys at least how to call the API. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a couple of different routes. So right now we have this /redirect. We obviously don't want to do everything in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and definitely get the access token. And then we're going to go ahead and save that access token. I think what we'll do is we'll actually save that to the arrays that we, not the arrays, the variables. So what I'll do is I'll say, let's see, let me do access token is equal to access token, and then, actually, wait, whoops, that's the wrong one. There we go, access token, and then refresh token is equal to refresh token. And like I said, you obviously would not do this in a real application. You would save this to a database, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send a 200 status code, or 200 that says you are authorized, okay? So pretty much that means that we have successfully authorized you. We exchanged your code with the server, and we have your information, or we can get your information. So what I'm going to do is, let's say, for example, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. So now I'm going to create a route that says /API/auth/user. And it's literally just going to do the same thing that we did with fetching the user. So let me go ahead and that. And keep in mind, we also are not using any sessions. Okay. Like I said, I'm just showing you an example of how the API call is going to look like. Okay. So I'm taking what I did in Postman and I'm pretty much converting it into an actual Axios call. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use a try catch. And this will only work if we actually visit this page first, okay? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and, let's see. We want to go ahead and create the URL search params. So I'll go ahead and do const form data equals new URL search params. And we're going to need the following. So we're going to need the authorization and the bearer token. Okay, so I think we actually don't even need to pass form data. What am I talking about? I apologize. We don't need to do that. All we got to do is just call axios.get, and we got to pass in that URL right over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And we need to provide headers. So let's provide the headers. So that's going to be authorization, and then bearer, and the access token. Okay, and okay, so there we go. And obviously in this route, what you would essentially do in a real application is you would either check to see if the user has the correct session, and like whatever session that user corresponds with. If they're authenticated, then you would actually get the correct access and refresh tokens for the user. But obviously I'm just cheating right now because I want to show you guys how this works. So let's go ahead and send the response.data back, and if there's an error, we will log that, and then we'll just send a status of 400. Okay, so in order for this to work, we actually need to go to the redirect first. We need to visit that route, and then we can only get the actual user data. So let's go back, and what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm going to authorize. Okay, so it says okay. And now if I just go to /API/auth/user, it's going to make the API call. So now you know how to actually make the API call. Okay, so instead of doing it in Postman, we're doing it in the actual code. And let's say, for example, the API call has already been made, and if I refresh, it's going to give me the same data, okay? And like I said, we're cheating, we're using variables. You would obviously get this from a database. What we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and revoke the token. So that will just simply be, so the user is going to visit this route, but obviously if you had a front end, we don't have a front end right now, but if you had a front end, and if they click on some button to revoke access, you would make a post request instead, okay? But for now, we're going to use a get request. So we'll do app, or sorry, not app, API slash auth, slash API slash auth, and we'll say revoke. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just get the function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that post request to the revoke endpoint. So I'm just going to copy and paste what I had up here because it's literally the same format. I'm going to add the slash revoke route at the end of token. And we're going to create the form data. So it's going to be form data equals new URL search params. And we're going to take the same key value pairs from Postman, and we're just going to put them in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the client ID. So client ID. And I'm going to just pretty much paste that in here. So we need the client ID, we need the client secret, and we need the token, the access token. So token, that's the name of the property, and then we're going to get the access token up here. So what I'm going to do is, so actually I could just do this. Okay, and so we have the form data. We're going to make the API call. Let me wrap this in a try catch. All right. And what I'm going to do is obviously if an error is thrown, it's going to be caught. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll just send response.data. And if there's an error, I guess we'll call it to log it. And we'll just send a status of 400. Okay, so let's go ahead and do everything again, because obviously, since we're not saving the access token or refresh token to a persistent storage like a database, we're going to have to redo everything again. So we're back on the authentication page. So let's go ahead and click on authorize. Okay, so it says okay. Okay, and we have the access and refresh token. So now if I visit the slash user route, okay, so I visit slash user, it's going to give me the data over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to visit the revoke route, and you can see that it gives us that empty JSON object, which is similar to what we saw in Postman. Okay, so we didn't get an error, which is good. Now watch what happens if I try to go back to the user route. So I'm going to type user, and you're going to see this bad request. So we revoked access, so that access token no longer works. Now if I were to authorize again, so if I were to go back to the authorization page, I can authorize, and I can do the same thing. So go to user, and then I can revoke, and I can go to user again, and then you'll see how that works. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. All right, so the last thing I'll do is I'll show you guys how to refresh a token. So I'm only going to do that on Postman, but obviously you guys can just convert it to code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just authorize again so I can actually get the access and refresh token. So I'm just copy that real quick, okay? And I'll just leave a comment right over here. So the way we're going to refresh a token is there's actually an endpoint that we can call. So it seems like we just have to call the slash OAuth2 slash token endpoint. So this is going to be a post request. And for the data, we're just going to pass in the grant type and the refresh token. So I think that's literally all we have to do. So if you look at line 17 to 23 over here, you'll see that for the grant type, we were getting the authorization code. We passed that over there. For this one, we're actually going to specify the grant type as a refresh token. So it's going to be the same endpoint, but it's just going to be a different grant type. So let's go ahead and just take this and let's put it into Postman. So what I'll do is we're going to call the same endpoint. So instead of slash revoke, we're going to go ahead and call slash token. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the client ID, the client secret. So we have the client ID and the client secret already. We're going to specify the grant type. So the grant type is going to be a refresh token. And we're going to go ahead and actually provide the refresh token. So let's do that. Whoops. Okay. So we actually don't even need the access token. We just need the refresh token. So let's go ahead and grab that. So that's this value over here. Yep, refresh token. So let's put that here. So let's go ahead and make that post request. And remember, it's the same format. It has to be URL encoded. So if you were to do this in code, it would literally look exactly like this. The only thing that you change is the grant type. You'd remove the code, the redirect URL, and you would provide the refresh token. Okay, very simple. And actually, when I upload the code, I'm actually gonna put like an extra route so you guys can see it on how it works. Okay, and I'll add instructions to it and how the flow is gonna work. So don't worry. So let's go ahead and click on send, and there we go. So you can see that we have a brand new pair of access and refresh tokens. So you can see that the refresh token is completely different, and I can actually. Let me see if I can refresh it again. I should be able to refresh it again. So yeah, you can actually refresh this as many times as you want, and you'll get a brand new access token that you can use every single time. So now if we go to the get request again, if I try to use this bearer token, you're going to see that it's going to work. Okay. And let me go ahead and do another revoke. And for the revoke, we have to provide the client ID. So let me get that real quick. So the client ID, the client secret, and then the last thing we'll need is the actual token. So this is the actual token right over here. Yeah, there we go. It's the same one. So we just take that token and then we pass that in, and then there you go. It revokes it, 200 OK status. If I try to use that token, it doesn't work. Okay, so one thing that I also am curious about is if you actually refresh your token over again, does the previous access token not work anymore? You know what, let's try that again. So here's what I'll do. Let me go ahead and authorize again. And let's go ahead and get the access token. So let's get that, okay? And what we want to do is we want to refresh this token. So this is the new token that we have. This token should work. So let me actually use that right now for this user's endpoint. So let's use that. So that gives us the data. Let's refresh that token. So that gives us this new token. If I try to use this token, it doesn't work anymore. So when you refresh a token, even if the token has not expired, if the access token is not expired and you try to refresh it, it will actually invalidate that. Okay, so I can't use the old token anymore, as you can see over here. I can use the new one. Okay, so if I use this one, okay, there we go. And if I refresh that token, it's going to give me a new access token and a new refresh token. If I try to use the old one, it's not going to work. So what you would do essentially is on your backend, you would have to save the new access and bearer token. Obviously, make sure you encrypt it. Okay, so yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything. We covered how to exchange the code for an access token. We covered how to use the access token to make API calls on behalf of the user, so we can get the user's data. Okay, I showed you guys how to revoke the access token, and also show you guys how to refresh the access token. So I think we covered a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video because I really had a lot of fun making it. If you guys did enjoy this video, please definitely leave a like, leave a comment, and if you want to subscribe. And I also have a Discord server, so if you want to get in contact with me, if you want to get help with this video or any code, you can join the Discord server. The link is in the description, and there's a lot of people that are willing to help you with your coding problems. So that's gonna be pretty much it. And I will see you guys in my next video. Peace out.